If you look at CIB as a whole, let's not forget, we're basically a flow bank. Yeah, we are accompanying the flows. And if you look at the parts of CIB, if you look at global banking, record levels up 6%. If you look at security services, up 7%. Look at equities prime services, up 11%. And so your question is, what's on FIC? And on FIC, basically, we have a very high base a year ago. I remind you that a year ago, given all the uncertainty there was a very high demand in Europe for FIC, and particularly if you look at commodities and currencies. Remember in the energy crisis. And BNP Paribas, we are mainly a European bank. 60% of the revenues of our FIC stems from Europe. And that is way above what you have in the overall banking system. And so we had that high base, which has returned to normal. This is basically what we see. So if you look at the longer term, you clearly see that we are up on market shares, and that is basically the base we will go forward. So our activity with the clients is very solid, and we will continue to ramp up our market shares in all of the domains, including FIC.
Certainly an argument that I'm sure your peers over at Deutsche Bank are watching very closely as well. Talking about ramping up, though, I'm curious about the ramp up in capital market activity in particular, that deal flow that we're talking about. There's early signs that perhaps you are going to see a little bit more deal flow coming up in the next couple of quarters. We just talked to the CEO over at Barclays about that as well. Where does BNP fall in that? Does this actually, is that a bet just on volume, or is that a bet on advisory fees? Where do you stand?
Listen, if you already look at our first quarter, so our capital markets activity is basically lodged in a department we call global banking. And if you look at global banking, as I said, record level, up 6% compared to a year ago, and capital markets is mainly a driver for that. So again, if you compare against a year ago, well, you needed magnifying glasses to see those activities. What you clearly see is now there is a pickup. And if you look at the Eurozone with what is ahead of us, what we anticipate, how we see inflation evolving, what we anticipate from the ECB, you clearly see that there is a positive trend on this.
Lars, good morning. It's Guy. Let's talk about the ECB. The rates market is all over the place. We've expected rate cuts. A lot of those have now been priced out. How much visibility do you have on net interest income going forward? What do you think the margins are going to look like? How easy is it to make a prediction on what those kinds of figures are going to be looking like?
Yeah, there's basically, Guy, if you look at it, there's two things. So the first question is, what is the ECB going to do? And so my read, whatever, I don't have a crystal ball, right? But my read is that you see in the Eurozone, you see inflation tapering off. So I anticipate that the ECB will lower interest rates. That will create a positive momentum. That positive momentum will then trigger growth, which will, and so on. So this is a virtuous circle that is probably going to come. So that is the first thing that we see. And as you know, we at BNP Paribas, we stand to benefit from this environment. And then the question is, what will be the overall environment on the pricing? And so what we see is that several of the banks we are competing with are somewhat in dire straits. And so we anticipate that the overall pricing will basically hold well. So we believe that the anticipation of lowering interest rates in the Eurozone will be a stimulus for a bank like BNP Paribas.